There's a type of person who can walk into a room, say almost nothing, and leave with a complete picture of everyone in it. Most people call that arrogance. They call it distance. They call it cold. Psychology calls it something entirely different. Because what you're about to hear might completely rewrite what you think you know about the most misunderstood personality type in the world. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why the INTJ appears cold and why the people who actually get through to them will tell you there's nothing cold about them at all. The INTJ, introverted, intuitive, thinking, judging. They make up roughly 2% of the population. They show up across every culture, every era, every institution, the scientist who works alone for years on a problem no one else believed in, the strategist who saw the outcome before anyone else could read the board, the quiet one in the room who, when they finally speak, says the thing that shifts the direction of the entire conversation. You probably know one. Or you are one. And if you've spent any time around an INTJ, you've felt it, that sense that there is an enormous amount happening beneath a very still surface. That the silence isn't emptiness. That the distance isn't disinterest. Carl Jung, who first mapped the psychological types that became the foundation of modern personality theory, described introverted intuition, the INTJ's dominant mental function, as a kind of internal vision, the ability to perceive patterns, structures, and meanings that haven't yet surfaced in the world. The INTJ isn't just thinking. They're running the future in their head, testing it against every variable they've ever absorbed. We're going to go through 7 things that explain the INTJ in a way that finally makes sense. 7 truths about who they actually are, underneath the reputation for being cold, arrogant, and impossible to reach. Let's start with the one that surprises almost everyone. The INTJ doesn't go quiet because they've disconnected. They go quiet because they're processing. Cognitive psychologists who study introverted intuition, Jung's knee function, describe it as a largely unconscious process. The INTJ absorbs enormous amounts of information from their environment, then runs it through an internal simulation before anything surfaces outward. Where an extrovert thinks out loud, the INTJ thinks inward, deeply, and only speaks once they've arrived somewhere meaningful. So when an INTJ goes silent in a conversation, they haven't left, they've gone deeper. And when they finally respond, what they offer isn't small talk. It's the distilled result of everything they just processed. If you've ever been frustrated that an INTJ won't just react, consider that they're not withholding. They're waiting until they have something real to give. But silence as processing is only the surface. What their mind is actually doing while they go quiet, that's where it gets fascinating. INTJs don't experience the world the way most people do. Where most people perceive what's directly in front of them, the INTJ is constantly perceiving what's coming, what patterns are forming, what the current moment will eventually become. This is introverted intuition at full power, and according to Jungian analyst Marie-Louise von Franz, who spent decades mapping how intuitive types experience reality, nine-dominant personalities often feel like they're living slightly ahead of everyone else. Not because they're smarter, because their mind automatically converts present data into future projections. This is why INTJs seem certain before the evidence arrives. It's why they make decisions that look reckless to others and then turn out to be correct. They weren't guessing. They were reading a trajectory that others hadn't yet noticed. For anyone close to an INTJ, this can feel alienating, like they're always somewhere else. And they are, just not where you think. Now, here's where it gets a little more complicated, because this is the part most people, even INTJs themselves, don't fully understand. The reputation for coldness hides something most people never see. The INTJ doesn't lack feeling. They lack the ability to express feeling in the way culture expects. Elaine Aron, whose research on highly sensitive people reshaped how psychology understands emotional depth in introverts, found that intuitive introverts often process emotional experiences with far greater intensity than their external presentation suggests. The INTJ doesn't show you the feeling because showing it feels exposing in a way that doesn't come naturally, not because the feeling isn't there. What you read as coldness is actually a firewall, not around a cold interior, around a very warm one that they've learned over years to protect. The frustration, the love, the loyalty, the grief, it's all there, running at full depth. It just doesn't come out in ways most people know how to recognize. And this next one, most people around INTJs get it completely wrong. The most common complaint about INTJs is that they're arrogant. But what most people are reading as arrogance is certainty, and those are not the same thing. Susan Cain, whose research on introversion reached millions through her landmark work Quiet, found that introverts are routinely misread as aloof, superior, or dismissive, when what they're actually doing is conserving focus. The INTJ doesn't engage with every opinion in the room because they've already thought through most of it. Not because they believe they're better, because they are genuinely allergic to noise. The INTJ isn't standing apart because they don't care. They're standing apart because they can't sustain shallow engagement for long without losing something important. The people who spend real time with INTJs almost universally say the same thing. Once you get past the surface, you find someone who takes you more seriously than almost anyone else ever has. If you're the kind of person who actually thinks about the people in your life, really thinks about them, not just what they do, but what's going on underneath, and you're still here, that tells me something about you. It would mean a lot if you hit subscribe. We put out videos like this every week, real psychology, explained in a way that actually makes sense for real people. Here's the part that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. The INTJ's clarity comes at a price. When you consistently see things before others do, when you're regularly correct about outcomes that take everyone else months to recognize, a gap opens between you and the people around you. Not because you're cold, because the experience of reality you're having is genuinely different from theirs. John Cacioppo, whose decades of research on social isolation transformed how science understands loneliness, found that chronic misunderstanding is neurologically indistinguishable from physical pain. Loneliness isn't simply about being alone. It's about being unseen. The INTJ often lives in that gap, perceived as distant, experienced as isolated. Not because they chose it, but because the architecture of their mind makes it genuinely difficult for others to follow them all the way in. And that quietly, invisibly costs them more than most people ever realize. But this is the root underneath all of it. INTJs aren't born closed. They become closed. Carl Jung's concept of the persona, the adaptive mask we develop in response to how the world receives us, explains how someone who was once intensely open and curious can, over years of being told they're too intense, too serious, too blunt, too much, gradually retract into a carefully constructed exterior that lets almost nothing in and almost nothing out. Most INTJs spent their childhoods being told their depth was a problem. Their certainty was arrogance. Their intensity was exhausting. And so they learned to contain it not because they wanted to, but because the world consistently responded poorly when they let it show. The coldness you see in an adult INTJ is often a layer of armor built in childhood, refined quietly across decades. Not a personality, a protection. Which brings us to the last one, and honestly, the most important. The INTJ doesn't trust easily. And that isn't a flaw. It's evidence of how seriously they take the people they choose. Jung's concept of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming fully yourself by integrating every part of who you are, describes the INTJ's deepest journey as learning to let their interior match their exterior, to stop protecting depth by hiding it, to find the people who can actually hold it. When an INTJ does let someone in, really in, they are among the most loyal, most perceptive, most genuinely committed people you will ever encounter. Because they don't do it casually. They don't do it often. But when they decide you're worth the risk, they mean it completely. The people who actually know an INTJ, not the version they show the world, but the version underneath, will often say it quietly, like it's something they're not sure others would believe. That this person, this supposedly cold and unreachable person, is one of the most extraordinary minds and most genuine hearts they have ever met. That's the truth most people never get close enough to find out. So the next time you encounter an INTJ, or recognize yourself in what you just heard, you know what you're actually looking at. You're looking at someone who thinks in futures while living in a present most people can barely keep up with. Someone who feels more than they will ever say, because for most of their life, feeling out loud wasn't received well. Someone who built walls not because they wanted to keep people out, but because no one ever showed them what it looked like when someone stayed. They aren't cold. They're careful. They aren't arrogant. They're certain, and there's a difference. And the people who earn their trust, who are patient enough, real enough, curious enough to stay, those are the ones who get access to one of the most remarkable inner worlds you will ever encounter. The INTJ isn't the cold genius everyone misunderstands. They're the rare kind of person who has never needed you to understand them, only to try. If you want to go deeper on how introverted personalities experience love and connection, I made a video specifically on that, and it hits just as hard. It's right here when you're ready.